He leaned down to my ear just before we stepped through the gilded doors and whispered, "Amelia, please don't embarrass me tonight. These people move billions. Just smile, stay quiet, and let me do the talking. Okay?" I didn't answer. I just gave the tiniest nod and kept walking. 3 seconds later, the ballroom exploded. 400 of the wealthiest people on the eastern seaboard rose to their feet at the same time. Clapping like thunder, the MC's voice boomed over the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, the woman we have all been waiting for, the person who literally rewrote maritime history this year. Dr. Amelia Harper." I felt Ethan's hand slip off my arm like it had been burned. His face went the color of printer paper. And in that moment, watching every assumption he'd ever had about me collapse in real time, I didn't feel anger. I felt free. My name is Amelia Harper. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 15 years I have spent more time underwater than on dry land. I'm a marine archaeologist, one of maybe 6 women on the planet who lead multi-million-dollar wreck recoveries. I find ships that have been lost for centuries, bring them back to the surface, and let them tell their stories again. National Geographic once called me Indiana Jones with scuba tanks. I've pulled Spanish gold out of cannonballs, read love letters preserved in rum barrels, held the bones of people who thought the ocean would keep their secrets forever. But to my husband Ethan, I was just my wife. She does something with old boats. We met 4 years ago at a rooftop charity thing in Boston. I was fresh off a dive in the Caribbean, sunburned, still smelling like salt, wearing a sundress I'd bought in an island market for $20. Ethan was in Tom Ford, flashing the kind of smile that says I've never been told no. He thought my stories about finding a 17th century pirate anchor were adorable. I thought his confidence was attractive. We got married 10 months later. For 4 years I let him believe his world was the only one that mattered. I listened to him talk about funding rounds and term sheets and how we needed to look the part if he was going to make partner. I stopped bringing artifacts home because he said the apartment wasn't a museum. I started wearing the clothes he liked, doing my hair the way he liked, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I told myself it was compromise. The truth? I was making myself smaller so he could feel taller. 8 months ago everything changed. I was approached to lead the recovery of the Santa Lucia, a Spanish galleon that sank off Cape Cod in 1692 carrying 40 tons of gold and silver meant to buy an entire colony out of debt. The salvage rights alone were worth hundreds of millions. The historical value? Priceless. The catch? The whole project was kept ultra quiet until the exploratory phase was finished. No press, no leaks. I signed the NDAs, kissed Ethan goodbye one morning, told him I'd be on a research boat for a few months. He rolled his eyes and said, "Try to shower when you get back. You always smell like low tide." I smiled, said nothing, and spent the next 231 days underwater proving the wreck even existed. He never asked the name of the boat. He never asked why I came home with new scars on my hands that used to be soft. He never noticed that the quiet little research grant I mentioned once had turned into nightly satellite calls with 3 governments and a budget bigger than his entire firm. Instead, over 4 years, he built a whole story about who I was. The wife who worked some kind of water science thing. The wife who should probably wear less cargo pants and more silk. The wife who needed to be coached before every dinner so she didn't say something embarrassing about barnacles or dead sailors. And I let him. Partly because I was raised to keep the peace. Partly because I was just tired after 14-hour dives. But mostly because some small, exhausted part of me started to wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe my world really was too rough, too strange, too blue-collar for the polished life he wanted us to have. Then came the invitation. A cream envelope, thick as a wedding invitation, delivered by courier to our apartment. The annual Ocean Conservation Gala. Black tie, 400 guests. Hosted by the youngest self-made tech billionaire on the Forbes list, Julian Voss. Ethan came home practically vibrating. "This is it, Amelia." Julian personally vets every name on that gets past the door. If I can get 5 minutes with him, we're set for life. He didn't notice the little gold embossed trident in the corner of the card. He didn't notice that my name was already pre-printed on the seating chart as guest of honor. For the next 4 weeks my husband turned into a stage mom. Week 1. You need to get your hair done somewhere that costs more than a car payment. No more salty ponytail. Week 2. We're buying you a dress. Not from a department store. Something that says, I belong here. I already booked the stylist appointments. Week 3. I made a list of safe topics. Weather, travel, art. Do not, under any circumstances, start talking about shipwrecks or parasites that eat wood. These people summer in Nantucket. They don't want to hear about worms. And finally, the night before the gala, as the car idled outside the venue, he took my hand, looked me dead in the eye, and delivered the line that still echoes in my head on quiet nights. Amelia, these people move billions. They are so far above us right now. Just, please don't embarrass me tonight. Don't ruin this for me. I looked back at him. In the $15,000 gown he'd chosen. Hair tortured into perfect waves. The smile I'd practiced in the mirror so it looked warm but not too eager. And I said the only thing I could without giving the whole game away. I won't embarrass you, Ethan. I promised myself that much was true. I just didn't tell him who the embarrassment was actually going to land on. The driver opened the door and the night air hit me like cold champagne. Ethan stepped out first, shoulders back, that practiced half smile already locked in place. He offered me his arm the way men do when they're about to walk into a room they think belongs to them. We moved through the marble foyer, past ice sculptures shaped like whales, past waiters carrying trays of champagne flutes that cost more than my first dive computer. And then we crossed the threshold into the ballroom. 400 people in tuxedos and gowns that shimmered like the surface of the sea at noon. Crystal chandeliers dripping light, a string quartet playing something soft Vivaldi. I felt Ethan squeeze my elbow a little tighter. The silent reminder, smile, stay small, let me shine. The MC, Julian Voss himself, 34, hoodie under his tuxedo jacket like the tech legend he is, was finishing his opening remarks. And before we begin the live auction, we have one very special guest who flew in this afternoon from the dive site. We actually pushed the entire program back 15 minutes because we refused to start without her. Ethan leaned in, confused. Did he just say dive site? Julian's eyes found me across the room. A grin split his face. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman who, 6 weeks ago, put her hand on 40 tons of gold that has been sleeping under the Atlantic for 333 years. The principal investigator of the Santa Lucia recovery, Dr. Amelia Harper. The room stood up. Not polite golf clap stood up. They stood up like people do for war heroes and rock stars. Chairs scraping, champagne glasses raised, phones out, applause that rolled like a wave and crashed over us. Ethan's hand went slack on my arm. I took one step forward. Alone. Julian left the stage and met me halfway. He didn't shake my hand. He pulled me into the kind of hug you give someone after you've spent months on satellite phones at 3 a.m. talking about how to keep 17th century timbers from disintegrating the second they see sunlight. Dr. Harper, he said into the microphone so the whole room could hear. This entire gala exists because of you. Every dollar we raise tonight goes straight to finishing the Santa Lucia Conservation Lab. And every person here has been dying to meet the woman who found the unfindable. He turned to the crowd. Somebody give this woman a standing ovation she actually deserves. They did, for 7 straight minutes. I looked back just once. Ethan was still standing exactly where I'd left him, mouth half open, blinking like someone had turned the lights on during a dream. A waiter offered him champagne. He didn't notice. A woman I recognized as a senator's wife tried to ask him to move so she could get to me. He didn't hear her. He just stared at me like he was seeing a stranger wearing his wife's face. Julian guided me to the stage. The lights were warm. The applause finally settled into an expectant hush. I leaned into the microphone and said the first words I'd practiced in my head 1,000 times on the dive boat when I was cold and lonely and wondering why I was still married. 4 years ago I married a man who asked me to make myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Tonight the ocean gave me the chance to stand up straight. Thank you for seeing me. The room roared again. And for the first time in years, I didn't look back to see if Ethan was proud. I already knew the answer. The rest of the night was a blur of faces I'd only ever seen on satellite calls at 2 a.m. Billionaire philanthropists, museum directors, 2 different princes, one actual, one crypto. They all wanted the same thing, to shake the hand that had touched the Santa Lucia's bell. To hear the story of the day we found the captain's log still sealed in a rum cask. To ask if it was true I'd spent 41 minutes at 140 feet without a hard line because the gold cross was tangled in the rigging and I refused to leave it behind. I told the stories. I laughed at the right moments. Let them take selfies with the woman in the $15,000 dress who still had salt calluses on her palms. Every time I glanced toward the edge of the crowd, Ethan was there, drink in hand, trying to smile like he was in on the joke. But his eyes were glassy, the way they get when the numbers on a spreadsheet stop making sense. At one point Julian pulled me aside and whispered, "Your husband looks like he just found out the earth is flat. Everything okay?" I smiled, the first real smile of the night. Everything is perfect. Around midnight the live auction started. First edition Audubon folios, a week on a private submersible, dinner with a former president. Then Julian took the stage again. Lot 47, gentlemen and ladies, one of the very first gold coins lifted from the Santa Lucia herself. Recovered personally by Dr. Harper. Starting bid $2 million. The paddle war lasted 4 minutes. When the hammer fell at $12 million, the winner, a quiet environmental tech founder named Lucas Whitmore, walked straight to me, pressed the coin into my hand, and said softly, "Keep it, some treasures belong with the person who earned them." He didn't ask for my number. He didn't need to. I already knew I'd be seeing him again. Ethan finally cornered me near the coat check as the crowd thinned. His voice was low, shaking. "You knew. This whole time you knew this gala was for you and you let me stand there looking like an idiot." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. "I told you about the Santa Lucia, Ethan, twice. You said, and I quote, 'Cool, babe, just don't get barnacles on the couch.'" His mouth opened, closed. Then the anger came, hot and defensive. "You deliberately humiliated me in front of the only people who matter." "No," I said, calm as low tide. "I just stopped protecting you from the truth." I walked away. He followed me all the way to the valet, whispering promises, then accusations, then threats about lawyers and community property and how my little boat hobby had exploded because of his emotional support. I got in the waiting car alone. 3 days later I moved out while he was at the gym. I took my dive logs, my regulator, the gold coin Lucas had pressed into my palm, and the quiet certainty that I was done shrinking. The first week after I left, Ethan still thought it was a tantrum. He sent flowers that cost more than my first wetsuit. Texts at 2 a.m. "Come home. We'll laugh about this later." Then the tone shifted. "You're throwing away 4 years over one bad night?" I didn't answer a single one. Week 3 he got angry. Called my mom, my sister, my old grad school advisor. Told them I'd lost perspective because of all the attention. They all called me crying, begging me to work it out. I sent them the video someone posted online, Julian Voss announcing my name while 400 people stood and cheered. They stopped calling. Week 5 he went nuclear. His lawyer sent a 73-page filing claiming that the Santa Lucia project appreciated dramatically during the marriage, and that he was therefore entitled to 50% of every future dollar the wreck generated. Because, I swear this was in writing, his emotional support and tolerance of irregular hours had been integral to Dr. Harper's professional success. I read it on the deck of the research vessel, wind whipping my hair, and laughed so hard the deckhand thought I'd finally cracked. My attorney, a shark in Kashmir named Vanessa, called me that same afternoon. "Amelia, this is the funniest filing I've seen in 15 years. We're going to bury him. But fair warning. Men who discover their wife is worth more than they tend to get creative." She wasn't wrong. For the next 4 months Ethan did everything short of hiring a skywriter. Showed up at the dock when we rotated crew. Trying to board with flowers and a photographer from Boston Magazine. Created a LinkedIn profile that listed Strategic Advisor, Santa Lucia Recovery, Family Office. Started dating a 27-year-old marine biology postdoc who looked great in bikinis and suddenly became passionate about shipwrecks. Emailed every museum donor on the project claiming he was my onshore liaison. It was pathetic. It was also exhausting. Then Lucas Whitmore, the man who'd spent $12 million on a single gold coin just to hand it back to me, called me himself. I hear your soon-to-be ex is making things messy. Need a hand? I thought he meant money. He meant something better. 2 weeks later, at the preliminary hearing, Lucas walked in wearing jeans and a quiet smile, sat on my side of the courtroom, and when the judge asked if there were any interested parties, he stood up. Your Honor, the Whitmore Foundation is the majority funder of the Santa Lucia Conservation Lab. We have a small receipts showing Mr. Caldwell's total contribution to the project over 4 years. One Yelp review that says, "Cool boat." We are happy to submit evidence that Dr. Harper's income predates the marriage by 9 figures and that her current contracts contain anti-spousal clauses drafted precisely to prevent this kind of claim. Ethan's lawyer turned the color of overcooked lobster. The judge didn't even let it go to discovery. Motion dismissed with prejudice. Ethan was ordered to pay my legal fees. Walking out of the courthouse, Lucas fell into step beside me. Dinner on the water tonight? My treat. No strings. I just want to hear the story of the day you found the captain's log. I said yes. 6 months later we were back on the water. This time on his research yacht, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon. I was barefoot, hair wild with salt again, wearing an old t-shirt that smelled like diesel and neoprene. Lucas handed me a glass of wine, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and said, "You know what I love most about you? You still smell like low tide, and you never apologize for it." He got down on one knee right there on the teak deck, held up the same gold coin from the Gala, now set into a simple ring, and asked me to marry him where the sky meets the sea. I cried so hard I almost dropped the ring overboard. A year to the day after the Gala that ended my old life, I stood on the bow of the new conservation vessel, christened Lucia's Revenge, in shorts and a sun hat, watching the crane lift the ship's bell that still read Santa Lucia 1692. Lucas wrapped his arms around me from behind. Somewhere on shore, Ethan was still trying to explain to people how he almost made partner once. Out here, the only voice on the radio was calling me captain. I pressed the gold coin ring to my lips and whispered the only truth that still matters. The greatest treasure I ever pulled from the dark wasn't 40 tons of Spanish gold. It was learning that my worth was never his to measure, and that the ocean always gives back what you're brave enough to dive for. End. Thank you for letting me tell you my story. If it made you cheer, made you cry, or made you realize you deserve to take up all the space you were born for, drop your favorite moment in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're still making yourself smaller for someone else tonight, stop. The water's warm, the treasures are real, and the only permission you need is your own. See you in the deep end.